Samyak, can you put in the comments? Let me just we do just a small introduction.
Yeah.
You keep the mic.
Okay.
I'm just very good. We'll start? Yeah. No. Yeah. Yeah. Hello, everyone. I, on behalf of Development Study Group, welcome you all to another research forum session. Development Study Group, or DSG, is an independent initiative by the students from the Faculty of Economics, South Asian University. We aim to provide and facilitate knowledge and discussion surrounding economic and development-centric thinking by organizing reading circles, film screenings, and lectures. Our sessions are aimed at pushing students towards understanding social realities and making sense of the topics usually left out of economics curricula. Our research forum sessions are designed for SAU PhD students to present their work and facilitate intra and sometimes interdepartmental conversations on various spheres of economic development. We have hosted 2 such sessions this semester, both by scholars of economics and of other disciplines. Today's session is by Samyak Jain on his work titled Reproduction of Occupational Segmentation through the Channel of School Education in India, Evidence from Andhra Pradesh or Telangana. Samyak is currently a research scholar at South Asian University. He has recently submitted his dissertation, which he worked upon primarily under the supervision of Dr. Snehashish Bhattacharya. His article titled Educational Segregation and the Household Occupation, the Role of School Education in Reproduction of Social Hierarchy in India, which focuses on the role of school education in diluting or reproducing social hierarchy, focusing on occupational segmentation in India, was published with Springer Nature in Palgrave journals last year. Okay, so yeah, all yours.
Thank you all for joining after post lunch period and post lecture period. I would try to keep it short and not bore you. I know the title of the presentation seems quite boring, and while I was typing, I was also bored a bit. But let's straight away diving into this thing. I wanted to inquire, like, what is the basic understanding that, like, what do you guys think about school education in India, or for example education in India for sure, per se? Can anybody, like, don't think of it as a monologue, but I believe it more of an interaction. I am also part of DSG, so don't worry. So yeah, anyone? Okay, good. And it's very poor in terms of quality, right? Correct. Very rigid curriculum. Correct.
My sister is recently, she's a teacher in the school too, and she was posted for exam ready, and the student got checked or something, and she was threatened. Like they even threatened her, like we will see you outside of the school. That when she did the audit.
Mm-hmm. Poor regulations. What else? One is expensive education. Second is poor regulation. Third is massive privatization, might be. Fourth is poor quality in general. What else? Anything else like lack of government, or some schools are performing well, some particular medium of instruction working in favor of someone. So let me tell you, do you guys all know about right to education in India? It was implemented in 2009. Before that, it was functional in some form, but as an act, it was accepted in India in 2009. What does that mean is, for any child of a school-going age between 6 to 14 years of age is eligible to go to any school. Like, he's eligible, or he or she is eligible to go to a education and get educated, right? But then the question arises, who will teach? Who is meant to provide? Is it private players? Is it government? By the act, it is the duty of government. Okay. Uh, then there is massive privatization. Before going to this thing, let me present you a key trend that I was also surprised to look at. Is it visible for all of you? So if you look at English medium private schools, so first I have bifurcated in terms of medium of instruction as well as type of management. So private and government, English medium and vernacular medium. Vernacular medium are all those mediums that are not English, including Hindi, Marathi, Gujarati, all of it. Okay. So let's just focus on the first bit. For the English medium private schools, in 1996, it was around 6.9%. Move to the last column, that was 2017-18. That is also dated till this date. That is what, 7 years ago? 7 years ago. We see from 6.9%, it jumped to almost 20%. What does that mean? That there has been an increase in private participation, correct? But does that mean everybody wants to go to private and government school should close down? What are your thoughts?
Because the quality of the government school is very good.
Hmm.
It doesn't give you any skills that will help you in the government.
Correct. What else? Basically, why do we want education? We want skills. We want employability. Correct. But is that the only function of education? Does that not make you think? Does that not make you question? Does that not make you ask more questions? So does that not becomes a problem for the one providing it? It should not.
I think that's
Yeah.
a privilege, like somewhere.
Hmm.
The position to ask questions.
Hmm.
If you are just studying to survive so that you can get your knowledge.
Hmm. Correct.
So asking a question is a kind of privilege.
Good point. Mainly, what I want to show through my presentation is what is going on in India in terms of school education, and taking a particular case of Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, based on availability of data. I want to make a case study how children attending particular kinds of schools are able to access different or differentiated channels towards which they are able to access different occupational outcomes. Okay, so let me begin by three broad views of education and economic development. One is, as you guys also pointed out, education provides skills. What does that skills do? It becomes an instrument towards employability. Basically, greater education might lead to higher mobility in terms of occupation. Second view is that of human development approach. It says that it is not only just to make people more employable, but it is also to expand their freedoms. Freedom to do what? Whatever they want. Expand their freedoms, capabilities, maybe lots of potentials that might be hidden there. In the third view, which is from a critical view, it says that education system per se might not function in a manner that is expected. It might function to produce hierarchies or existing social structure, and education as a social institution might function as a reproductive organ of the society. These are just three broad views. So main motivation of making this presentation or making this article was that if we think school education is important under RTE or in general, we think that people with greater school education or access to school education should be eligible towards upward mobility, be it private education, be it government education. That means if we just look at years of education, so a person who has done education from government school or one who has done 10 years of education from private school and 10 years from government school should have equal chances of mobility, correct? Then we talk about skills like reading, arithmetic, what are the learning outcomes there. But literature suggests something else that, that also came up in this discussion. Private and government schools differ in terms of quality, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of what are the skills that they are imparting. Several studies have shown, like also in that NSSO study, I showed that private schools have been in participation in private schools have been increasing, and there is a rising preference for private schools, with which people associate with better quality of education. Uh, in parallel, in the economy, there also exists a socioeconomic segmentation of households, which means that by the occupation of the household, children might be able to access different kinds of schools, which might lead to different possibilities of their occupational movements. Uh, but one thing that came up in this discussion is that private schools might be providing better quality of education, government schools might be providing poor quality of education. But the question that I want to raise is who are able to access these kinds of institutions? Are better off people going to government schools? Are worse off people able to go to private schools? Have you guys heard of a term low-fee private schools? Low-cost private schools? So there is a recent literature since a decade ago, where people have been pushing, even academicians have been pushing for private schools, which might provide education in a low-cost sense. Basic cost. What is the basic cost of private schools? So my question comes this, whether a child attending better quality school type is likely to attain a higher ranked occupation relative to their initial household occupation. Data sources, I use Young Life's panel survey, which looks at which studies, should I say? Which studies 1,000 children born in 1995. Rather than delving into more details, we can discuss this later. I classify occupations into 5 types: salaried, non-agricultural self-employed, non-agricultural casual laborer, agricultural self-employed, agricultural casual laborer. In terms of schools, I categorize into 3. One is government, other is low-fee private school, and third is high-fee private school. So if we look just by the look of socioeconomic status of households, I categorize each kind of occupation, which is a bit not surprising to be seen, where salaried households have a higher average wealth index than NASE, non-agricultural self-employed, followed by an NACL, followed by ASE, and followed by ACL. ACL here being the lowest categories, least wealthy household in that sense. Similarly, we construct a ranking of school types based on the reading, writing outcomes of children. We find that high-fee private schools comes out to be topmost, low-fee private comes in the between, and government schools, as we expect, comes out at the bottom. But then the question arises, who are able to access these kinds of schools? Is any child or a child belonging to the lowest socioeconomic status, that is ACL, able to access high-fee private school? What are your thoughts? Yes, no, maybe. So when I ran a logit regression, I found that, as expected, children from salaried households were more likely, non-agricultural self-employed were more likely to attend high-fee private schools. Even they were more likely to attend low-fee private schools. And children from low categorized households were not able to access these schools after controlling different socioeconomic categories. Then, where does a child end up? A child attending a private school, a child attending a government school, where do they both end up? That's what the aim of the study is. We look at the status, whether a child is continuing in salaried occupation when he turns 22-year-old, whether they NACL occupations, ASE, ACL, or whether they are continuing in their studies or simply unemployed. Here, an interesting pattern to observe is that children belonging to from salaried as well as NAC backgrounds were able to continue in higher education in much greater sense. If I look at the table broadly, those belonging to salaried occupations and NACE occupations had lesser chances, lower proportion of being in occupation. They were either continuing in higher education or were simply unemployed. What does that mean is these children belonging to these households might be more in a more privileged position to wait for better occupational chances. Okay. However, for those in lower category occupational types were least likely to continue in higher education or to stay unemployed. If we simply look at those who were continuing in occupations, we find an interesting pattern. So those from salaried households, 53% of them continued in salaried occupations. Those from NAC occupations were able to move from NAC to salaried. But an interesting pattern to see is that for those belonging to lower categoried occupations were also able to move salaried to salaried occupations. Main purpose now is to see how education empowers them to make this transition. So I ran a logit model again, rather than without going into details. I simply look at here in this table, we look at children belonging from salaried households. What are the chances of them experiencing an upward mobility? What that means is for a child belonging to salaried occupation, what is the chance of them staying in salaried occupations? So if we see for those attending high fee private schools, they remain highly likely, 8 times more likely than a child attending a government school from same kind of household. What this means is that let's take base of those children who were belonging to salaried households but were attending government schools. We compare them of similar children who attended high fee private schools. So we see that those who are attending high fee private schools were actually more likely to gain that mobility, controlling for all different all different socioeconomic characteristics. Similarly, for NACE households, here we see that years of education matters. However, the high fee private schools continue to remain an important marker. One thing which comes out to be surprising is that for children attending low fee private schools experience no significant chance of moving upwards. So what does that mean simply? That simply might mean that simply attending any private school might not improve your chances. We do not find any evidence that attending low fee private schools might improve your chances. Attending any private school does not necessarily improve the chances of upward mobility in the context of Andhra Pradesh, but only high fee private schools provide such opportunities, given that a majority of population remain excluded from participating in these private schools. This may also limit their chances of upward mobility. Doing a similar analysis for children belonging to NACL, ASC, or ACL household, we find that they experience no such mobility chances, even if they were attending high fee private schools. What does that simply mean? On one side, we observed in this table that they were experiencing some mobility. But what this table shows is that they might be experiencing mobility, but education is not surprisingly empowering them. The current education system is not empowering. These were also the children who attended government schools in massive quantity, but they were not able to experience mobility opportunities. So the main thing is that before coming to the discussion, another table that I wanted to show, this was the context in terms of Telangana, Andhra Pradesh. This table, this figure is in all India context. From 2007-8, this is NSSO data, 2007-8 to 2017-18. Can you see a major change? EMP is English medium private, English medium government, vernacular medium government, and vernacular medium private. So if you see just EMP, it is 35% for salaried. These are the children who are participating in these schools. 35%, 17%. It moved to 40%. It moved to 30%. And for them, it remained very low. Even for 4.4 to 9.9%, they have improved, but it still remains marginal. In terms of vernacular medium government schools, these remain largely green. What is shocking in this sense is that nearly 65% of population in India continues to participate in government schools. So what do we say? One conclusion can be to shut down government schools, give them to private. There has been a drive towards, if you see the literature of consolidation, school closures, it is not new, it is happening. Another is voucher system. Do you know about voucher system? The schools would be privately managed and the government would be providing vouchers to individuals who can go to any schools and then they can access, just like insurance schemes. Yeah. A third thing, which might be a difficult thing, is to push for improvement of government schools. So these are the three main takes. But coming back to the topic that we are discussing here, if the current pattern of access, school access, prevails, it is likely to reproduce the occupational structure. What does that mean? Those coming from salaried backgrounds are able to take up salaried occupations. Those coming from lower backgrounds continue to remain in the lower ones. That's how the society is reproducing. What is surprising in that is when RTE was pursued, it was implemented, it was expected that it might improve the access, it might improve the what they call demographic dividend. Currently, there is high rates of educated unemployment. There is, so can you see the layers? One is people are not able to get good education. Another is even if they are getting good education, they are not able to take up occupations. So based on that, I would say reproduction might not be a correct term, but a worsening of occupational cycle. Thank you.
Yeah, so we are open for questions. Anybody who would like to ask?
Oh, by the way, one graph I forgot to show is that access or participation in private schools have actually improved for different states. You can see for Rajasthan from 6.9 it went to 11.2. For Odisha it went to 6.2. For Andhra and Telangana it rose massively. So yeah, that's where I am in my presentation.
So I have a question, Samyak.
Yeah.
I come from West Bengal, and my family is very intricately dealing with this government schools. So there is this midday meal scheme that is going on, and a consensus that I've noticed and they have noticed as well is even though this midday meal scheme is a big scheme and it's apparently working so well, but the incentive is not very. It's not very founded. Like the students would just go during the break, and like the students would like bring their siblings along, but no classes happening. So, in use of these like incentives, like it is something that government is not going to encourage education, but that's
Yeah, these are the provisional measures that have been taken by the government. But one thing I would say is that provision of midday meal is also a bit questionable these days. One thing is that the nutrition, we have recently visited few schools. One is nutrition, another is variety of diet. They don't provide a lot of variety. Third is push for vegetarianism, which they have been openly doing. Mainly Akshay Patra and ISKCON are providing. The few schools that I visited, I talk to children. So what they do is, even after, if they are served with midday meals, they are bringing lunch from home because they are simply saying that it's not tasty or it's not worth having. So there are problems for sure. But the aim of the government for midday meals is to improve access. And I'm sure it has worked. It has worked.
Just 1 minute before we continue the Q&A. We'll just serve the tea and coffee now and we can keep talking.
Yeah, yeah.
But how many people want tea, how many people want coffee? Just raise your hand.
Tea.
10 people.
Yeah.
Why do you say that the most tricky thing is going to be continuing with public education? So where this question is coming from is, one, do we know why this transition is happening from government? Like, okay, we don't know why, if the quality is poor and so on and so forth. But in some cases, and this is the story I got, there used to be a fully functional government school. It's like very shortly infrastructure, first of all, just like in some cases in West Bengal, one person used to teach until it was a primary school, one person used to teach all the classes.
Yeah.
He retired, the school shut down. So it's not like so that's one problem. But another is, if there is a pre-existing infrastructure of a government school, a lot of the times companies come in with their CSR activities and they build up their own school, and that is then subsidized. So people migrate into it. And then suddenly when the grant or the contract period is over, that is left desolate, and the pre-existing infrastructure of the government school has already crumbled, and suddenly people have nowhere to go. And because school is section-wise divided, primary, secondary, higher secondary. So are they, like this transition to private English medium schools, is it just a regular transition because of better opportunities, or is it in some part a bit coercive also, where people have good options? So, like, could you elaborate a bit more on why you specifically say that it's the trickiest part is rebuilding that infrastructure?
Yeah. So one thing is that there have been a lot of push and pull factors. One push factors I would say is a consistent reduction in allocation towards government education. If you see the allocation towards education, it was supposed to be in 1986. Kothari Commission proposed it to be 6% of the GDP. He calls it 6%. With increase in GDP, it should also increase. Currently, after somewhat 40 years, we are still around 4 or 4.5%, and it might be less than that. It dwindles around 3.5, 4.5. Okay. So one thing is that it is surprising to see for something which is useful for a government or for a nation, when we call it demographic dividend or economic growth. One thing that is accepted as basic is human development, skilling. So even after so many years, they have been pushed towards or deterioration of government schools. When I say that it is tricky, you exactly pointed it correctly that at some point of time, government schools were actually providing better education. And when I was doing my first paper, looking at DICE data, I was able to observe in 2010, English medium government schools are performing much better than English medium private schools. What happened in this 7 to 8 years is quite surprising. There might be some policy that might be happening. If you also see a rise in shadow education or what you call private tuitions, their business have been increasing in this past 10 to 15 years. What is happening? There might be something that government is consciously doing. They call it policy neglect. I call it policy choice. That is happening. So one is push factors, another is pull factors. If you see within Delhi also, so I will take your question. If you see in Delhi also, just go to, they have available DICE data. Okay, DICE data does it for all the recognized schools. You can see region by region, they have actually divided the market. Like if you see list of private schools, they will all be English medium. If you see nearby government schools, they would be providing Hindi medium. If the economy is rapidly expanding, if we are globalizing, even for Delhi standards, do we not need more government schools? Do we not need more English medium government schools? So that is there. And that pull factors is there. English medium education, better quality, so that are there. So both factors work in tandem, and rather than pushing or calling for better government schools, their civil society needs to work more. That's why I call it tricky, because those who are able to view it take choice of moving towards a private school, and those belonging to casual laborer or laborer household might not have that political voice or need more political voice to make these schools more functional. So yeah.
So the recent trend of people moving towards more private schools, I think there is a link towards the whole, spread of or the, giving entrance exams for every. Like, if I want to enter any bachelor degree, I need to clear n number of entrance exams. So there is a belief among the people if my kid studies only at a CBSE board, they will clear the entrance exam and they will be securing the seat. Because there is this whole belief among the people of the country that only CBSE board will give you the kid how to critically think. The whole attack on the state board education that this is not useful. This is just like just mugging up the state board. Only CBSE people used to critically think. That myth is there. And it gives the aspiration among the people, despite the income level. I will make my kid educated at
Correct.
CBSE.
Yeah.
That is it. This is my point on this. One question that I have is that like the occupational segmentation, like quote unquote reproduction happens. So there are a lot of civil servants and even bureaucrats like MLAs and MPs being in government. They do make their kids educated in government schools. Do you think their kids also fall under the same quote unquote low occupational mobility? No. Their kids, despite being educated at government schools, they will always be in a good occupational position. So, what role of something that is anyway something that plays there. So, what do you think about it? The data doesn't show that because it's a deviation or outlier. So, how do you interpret that?
So one thing is that if you say that CBSE schools are more competitive in that sense, why not push for more government CBSE schools? If CBSE might be the answer, let's push for CBSE government schools. Second thing is that, as you said, for civil servants, even if they go to government schools, the kind of government schools that they are accessing is actually surprising. On the face of it, they call it government schools. If you go to the participation rate or that basically the diversity that is there, you're talking about Sanskriti schools, right? Sanskriti or government model schools or Kendriya Vidyalayas, Jawahar Navodaya Vidyalayas, right? These schools, one thing is that they are very small in numbers. Secondly, the batch that they are able to attract is actually of a particular kind. So within government schools, the pattern that I was able to show is for a broad government schools. It includes KVs, it includes large state government schools, it includes local body schools. But if we try to segregate them or look at them in a more disaggregated sense, these particular government schools are actually channels for upper class, I would say upper class or salaried class, to actually access. And if you compare these schools, Sanskriti schools and KVs, they actually have better infrastructure and much more teaching quality, much better education quality than a private school. Even among the private schools, there is another group that is leading called IB, International Board. They are also training a batch of super rich to go for a global citizenship. So yeah, that disaggregation needs much more greater detail. Yeah.
Yeah, so this discussion on KB. So thing is, schooling being a state subject.
No,
State schools. No?
it's a both subject, concurrent, state as well as center.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So state schools and I mean states generally mean I mean schools run by state boards.
Yeah, yeah,
So and KB belongs to central.
yeah.
So in that way, yeah, that one direction had like during discussion, I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so like during the discussion, we are pushing for more schools like KVs, right?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Better quality
Wouldn't
government
that,
schools.
I mean, interfere with the state government and boards?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, basically, we are not pushing ki we need to expand KVs or what. In general, government schools that general public are perceiving needs improvement. And when I was looking at DICE data, working at School Quality Index, the main problem was not the teacher quality. Teachers were actually more qualified than private schools. The main issue that was coming out was infrastructure. When in the recent period when I visited schools, schools were getting very low funds. First of all, I have heard stories about teachers, government teachers having to go towards community to borrow money from the community. Why do we need that? Can't government fund them well? So that is the issue. Funding is one. Another thing is constant policy neglect or choice. So yeah.
I have a question. Like, what is the differentiating factor between the KB school, which you guys talk about, the government school in India? Like, why is the KB functioning so well in other schools, other state schools, for example?
Maybe by the funding of it.
Like class of students that government teachers put in the important something.
They have different parameters, I would say. For the government schools, for the KVs, they have a list of list of norms that they have to fulfill. First is pupil teacher ratio. Another is how qualified the teachers, like TGT, trained graduate teacher or a postgraduate teacher. What is the qualification of it? Uh, Apart from that, whether the teacher has a BEd degree. So these norms take care of the functional bit of it. Another thing is administration. So when I visited schools, KV, including KV, the principals as well as the staff seem much more enthusiastic, because one thing is that they don't have to engage into multiple things, uh, multiple non-academic thing, non-teaching thing. When I went to this government schools which were not KVs, which were not centrally funded, they had this problem of poor funding. There, if you imagine their government flow for 1 year, can you imagine what can be the minimum for a school that have 400 kids or 600 kids? Their annual allocation was 25,000. Annual allocation that I'm saying. So there is clearly a funding problem. There clearly is a policy choice problem. So yeah. Yeah.
So in the EPT, there is a graph, there is a table, you know, like people belonging to a particular household and where they are getting landed, like in EPT.
Okay.
The transition. So how do you actually get the data, like this one?
This is a panel data. So in 2000, they are following the same batch of kids from 2002 to 2016. So in 2006, what are the occupations that their household head was doing? And in 2016, what are the occupations? Yeah, same household, same person. No, this is Young Lives data. NSS data is a cross-sectional study. Yeah.
Also, one more question, like you were saying that the reproduction of occupation status. So in India, occupation status is like always caste also.
Yeah, yeah.
How are like the dynamics? So did you look into caste or anything like that?
With this data, there is not much variability along caste. At India level, I'm sure there would be. But I agree with you that there is a clear linkage with, for example, ASC and ACL belonging to lower caste, or salaried and NASC belonging from upper caste. I'm sure there would be a good load there. Yeah.
Like, with all these findings, do you have any special finding that COVID-19 has has caused? Because again, coming to that, in West Bengal, a lot of allocations has been pulled out, or even if on paper the allocations were given, the government and whatever was diverting the allocation from school funds to various
Heads, yeah.
other things. So,
Yeah.
so like, do you have any findings which got affected by COVID-19?
So this data also recorded in 2020, but what they focus is not on particularly education per se, but how are they coping up? Basically, this survey only, Young Lives. What my understanding from other sources is that during COVID-19, there has been a massive movement from private towards government schools. So children belonging to this middle class are actually accessing towards government schools. If one learning is that if people are resorting to government schools, why not make it better? Why not push it to improve it? So yeah. So I'm sure COVID-19, after COVID-19, there would be a lot of movements, and learning loss is quite evident in that sense.
Because like a lot of students, and especially like women who are like high school and students, they dropped out. They dropped out left and right, and they were like married off or like sent to the whatever job market they could find.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if that the mass dropping out, and even the teachers, as you said, like had to go to community, had to knock up their individual doors and like please send your kid back.
Yeah, yeah,
that,
for
that
sure.
thing happened to the government.
Yeah, yeah.
So I was wondering whether that has an effect on whatever findings.
The current findings is shown till 2016. I'm sure when the newer round or IHDS data comes out, I would be able to answer these questions in much more detail. But my hunch is that yeah, there would be a lot of churning going on during or after COVID-19. The ASA reports claims things to be corrected to the pre-pandemic levels. But when we look into details and read those reports, there actually is not that much recovery. So yeah.
From my understanding, it's based on the prevailing list.
Yeah.
Right? So, how important the regional factors in the list actually play into the overall findings of this? Like, if we put an analogy, because I'm seeing the daily structure and everything. So there are a posh Delhi area, and there are this other like non-posh Delhi area. So location also plays a
For sure, yeah.
factors, right? In those areas, there might be more privatization, and also government schools of high standard would be placed there.
Yeah, yeah.
And then in the low posh areas, there might be semi-private institutions and mostly low quality government. So how that kind of regional factors play into that outcome?
So regional factors play a lot more factors for sure. When I was looking at data, I was able to see that English medium government schools are actually placed in places where there is more likelihood of upper caste or upper classes being located. So another factor is why people are not able to access these government schools. Another factor is that transportation might be an issue. Some regional dynamics might be there. In this data, what they do is they focus on just the poor childs, not the upper classes. Based on that, many of them, when I was looking at the panel version of it, many of them are actually dropping out after 15 years of age and not able to continue in education. When I say that in 2016, if I show this data, look at the interesting pattern is 34% of the salaried are able to continue in higher studies. Another 30% are unemployed, simply unemployed. That leaves around 40% who are taking up any occupation. So I'm sure these are also somewhat showing some regional dynamics. The salaried might be placed a bit differently than an ACL or a ASC household. So on the face of it or explicitly, I did not look at those regional dynamics. But when they were comparing different districts, there was sure some variation in availability of government schools as well as private schools. So rich, prosperous areas have it is also surprising that much more prosperous areas might be having much more performing government schools. Poorer areas might be having poorly functional government schools, and adjacent to it, there might be well-functioning private schools, where people from well-off backgrounds might be traveling, like concentrating there. So that also been observed. Yeah.
One was that for the private schools, it was much easier to relate to the model of learning because they could always switch to digital mode and people could access education through digital means. But government schools, it was relatively harder. And with Delhi also with frequent closures happening also more than ever because of pollution and every other thing happening. There's always like a digital divide of sorts that makes the outcome of education and learning very
Exactly.
creates
Yeah.
learning outcomes as well. So
That is true.
I think one of the things is if improving infrastructure is one of the major factors, could digital switching to digital transformation could be one of the policies.
Actually, this is pushed in.
How prominent is the district learning option a viable solution for education, especially because it's a very basic stage. It might work for maybe higher education because it requires a certain level of conscious effort that may not come from very young kids. So you need personal attention for sure. But can we really look at that model?
I would not be a big promoter for it. Two reasons there. One is that the private were able to switch towards digital module much more easier, is because of the crowd that they are attracting, right? Secondly, it was actually much more easier for the government to do it at this institutional level, but for the children to access these type of content, like Swayam channel, if you come to know, children who are accessing government schools actually belong to that poorer household background. And if you're vouching for a module where children are able to study from home, many of these children actually have a single room where all their household chores take place, everything I'm saying. So in that sense, going to a school becomes a privilege. Why? Because to have a segregated space towards learning, at home, they were not able to. They were not entitled to it.
Non-governmental organizations work on this model, right? See, the education is one of the sectors. Okay, what we do is collect children in one particular place, and they like use any digital and play a model over that particular space for all the children. And then there are dedicated instructors who work for particular hours after playing that model.
Yeah.
In that sense, you just gather the children at one place. There's no specific infrastructural environment that requires a huge investment, but they're using digital modes to maybe cater to the geographical location and needs of that.
Yeah, I'm sure that is quite helpful. But to scale up that thing, to make it, rather than to do it ad hoc, and to scale up these things and make it much more regulated, I would say it's better to go through government channels, because an NGO cannot be dependent for a delivery of education for pan-India basis. They have limited funds, right? That's why. So I'm sure that initiatives are important, but to expect much more from NGO, it is better to collaborate with the government itself to have a massive pool and scale up these successes, I'm sure. So I hope I didn't bore you. So, yeah. No, wait. Tathagat has a question. Yeah. Tell.
No, in the last towards the end, you said that it's not just a reproduction of the existing inequalities, but also a worsening of it. Can you elaborate a bit on that? Like you did, but I think I missed out on that. But can you elaborate why is it a worsening?
Actually, I would say it's a worsening because one, India is not producing as many jobs as it needs to be. The salaried jobs are actually shrinking over time. There is a massive informal space that has been building up. On top of it, there is a gig economy that has been bubbling. Third thing is that for those affected by COVID-19 and they have been facing learning losses, are not able to remedify that. So even if schools that have remedial lectures, they are not able to bring them to the pre-pandemic level of learning. Third thing is that for those who have graduated school and not even responsibility of school themselves, the higher education is facing issue. I have attended these talks by a dean of uh, science institution. He was bothered that even after COVID-19 and even after remedial learning, children are actually not able to cope up. So when we say that there is a digital divide, and on top of a divide of public schools versus private schools, it is actually more worsening if not taken care of. So yeah.
Another point you mentioned twice that it's not a policy maker but a policy choice. I'd like to push you a bit on that. Why do you think this particular, like I'm sure there can be several reasons, but for you, what do you think are some of the key reasons why the government is interested in doing what it is doing?
I
Why make
believe
that choice?
I believe there has been a massive, or not a massive, or a subtle movement towards a reduction of the welfareist role from the government. If you see economic surveys, if you see the budgets, there have been a constant reduction or a constant stagnation in the government funding that has been going to social sectors. Even if you see economic survey of this year, there used to be in education per se, there used to be a Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan. There used to be for primary, for children from first to eight. There used to be a RMSA, Rashtriya Madhyamik Shiksha Abhiyan, and there used to be a teachers funding, teachers training wala fund. What they did is to combine three of them under Samagra Shiksha Abhiyan. And now it is even more difficult to track which part goes to primary education, which part goes to secondary education, and which part goes towards teacher training. So, in an attempt where particular modules need to be given more decentralized approach, the state is moving towards more centralization and more opening spaces for private players. If we see the new education policy as well, what they call is for more community volunteers, right? What they identify community volunteers as those who have graduated in the nearby region or from the same living space. But what is the incentive that they are giving to them? Nothing. Those who are able to, in one of the school, it was quite surprising. Two teachers were coming from as community volunteers. The same teachers were taking private coachings. So they were actually coming to government schools to pool of fund. So when such practices are there, it's not inevident or can't be seen. It is visible. The suffering of teachers is also visible. When all of this is staying and it is visible for the government as well, I would say rather than acting upon it, they are accepting it, letting the private players take over is a policy choice where government's notion of minimum governance is taking various nascent forms. So yeah.
In the data that you're using, uh, when you talk about people who attended the different categories of schools, so is it people graduating from those schools or people enrolling into those schools?
The NSS data or
I think the NSS data.
the NSS data that I showed is for at that point of time, what they were present in that school, what kind of school that they were attending. Whether they graduate or not, whether they switch over is not easily visible. Such kind of information might be more from a detailed panel survey, maybe.
So on the one hand, you have this picture there. Well, we call it a choice, but it's also basically a choice of neglect.
Yeah.
You're actively neglecting
Yeah.
that part of it. And as people had pointed out in the discussion when you were completing that, there's also the rise of this private coaching. So you're sort of following out the space where the state can do education. So that you are also simultaneously seeing this massive expansion in both private schooling and private coaching. So it's sort of like a dual movement where you.
It's much more segmented than that.
Yeah.
Not even dual.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
Since we were talking about the full functioning of the government schools, so I have came across a lot of incidents where the teachers, since they don't, like I feel for the government school teachers, they don't have much of accountability of how they behave. So there are like instances where they have made some of the unacceptable behaviors with the students based on from where they are coming or based on their parents' occupation, religions. So, to what extent do you feel that plays a important role in this, in all these results that we are seeing in these classes?
I'm sure that affects. Bourdieu calls it a problem of habitus, the background from which a child belongs and the accepted practices within the schools that is there. That mismatch, that caste issue that you're saying, कि तुम lower caste के हो, तुम यहाँ नहीं पढ़ सकते, and there have been instances where lower caste students are asked to clean the toilets. So in those instances, it actually makes it insufferable for these kids belonging to poor, socio-economically backward places. I would say it is also a problem of administration, of monitoring. If not looked at more closely, more strictly, these practices prevail. So it is actually not acceptable, and it can be easily dealt, much more relatively easily dealt, if the administration takes care of it. So yeah. So yeah, thank you so much for an amazing discussion. I hope I didn't make your tea boring. So I'll just stop sharing. Huh?
So I thank you all for coming for this research forum session. Thank you, Samyak, for sharing your incisive work, which I'm very sure will lead to more very charged up discussions and engagement that we have done. Thank you all for your participation and your questions. I would just like to say that we have a public lecture coming up on the state of India's macroeconomy and the Union Budget 2025 by Professor Shurojit Mojumdar on 4th of March. So I hope to see you all there. And yeah, thank you. And also there is a leftover coffee and so much.